They cast us out at dawn. No ceremony, no words, just the iron latch snapping shut behind us and the crunch of dry dirt beneath my boots. Jesse's small hand clutched my skirt, trembling like a leaf. I didn't look back. If I had, I might have dropped to my knees and begged, and I swore I'd done enough begging for a lifetime. The Ridley house was never mine, not really. Even after Jacob died, after the fever took him and left me a widow at 24, his kin never looked me in the eye. They fed Jesse on Sundays and let me sleep under their roof, but I was a ghost to them, a burden they only tolerated because my boy bore their blood. Until the rumors started. She brought the sickness, they whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. Should have married someone local, someone proper. Then came the bruises, disguised as accidents. Then came the silence at supper. Then came the rope sack thrown at my feet, a crust of bread, 2 matches, and 1 canteen of water. No apology, no farewell, just dust. Jesse didn't understand. "Why can't we stay, Mama?" he asked again, as he had the night before and the one before that. "Because not all houses are homes," I said, and kissed his forehead. We walked west, though I couldn't say why. Maybe I'd heard a name once, a creek that ran cold through the high plains, or a woman who kept a boarding house near the edge of Indian territory. Maybe I was just chasing distance. Every step we took, the sky got bigger, and the silence louder. Wind stirred the grass like waves in an ocean, and somewhere overhead, a hawk cried as though mourning. By noon, Jesse was too tired to walk, so I carried him on my back, his thin arms around my neck. My bones ached, but I bit down on the pain and kept going. The sun beat down, and our water ran low. I saw shapes in the distance. Trees, maybe, or tricks of heat. We crossed a gully, then a ridge, then found ourselves in a stretch of land I didn't recognize. The soil changed color, richer, darker, and there were animal tracks along the creek bed. I knew enough to follow them, though I prayed whatever made them had already passed through. That's when I felt it. Not the kind of fear that comes in a rush, like thunder or gunfire, but the kind that creeps slow under your skin. The back of my neck prickled, my breath shortened. Something, or someone, was watching us. I didn't stop walking, didn't even flinch, but I whispered to Jesse, "Hold on tight now." His grip tightened. I could hear my heart in my ears. A branch snapped behind us. I turned quick, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. Just leaves. Stillness. The hush before something breaks. Then Jesse lifted his head. "Mama," he said quietly. "There's a man." I followed his gaze. He stood maybe 20 yards off, half shadowed by cottonwood. Trunks, tall, still as a post. His chest bare, painted with faded ochre streaks. A wolfskin draped one shoulder like a cloak. In his right hand, he held a bow, unstrung. His eyes, dark, watchful, met mine and didn't flinch. A Comanche. I'd never seen one up close before. The stories I'd been fed growing up painted them as devils on horseback, scalpers and raiders. But this man didn't move, didn't charge or shout or bare his teeth. He just stood there, quiet as the trees. My voice caught in my throat. I raised one hand slowly, not in surrender exactly, but not in defiance either. "We don't mean trouble," I said, trying to keep the fear from cracking my words. "Just passing through." He blinked. Once. Twice. Then, without a sound, he turned and melted into the trees. Gone. I didn't move for a full minute, waiting to hear hoofbeats or a whistle or something worse. But the woods stayed silent. Even the birds held their breath. Eventually, Jesse whispered, "Is he gone?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure. We walked on, slower now, watching every shadow. By the time dusk fell, My legs shook and my lips were cracked. Jesse's head lolled against my shoulder, too weak to speak. I stumbled into a clearing with a stream, real water, moving and clean. I dropped to my knees and let Jesse down gently. I cupped the water in my hands and brought it to his mouth. He drank, then coughed, then drank again. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I blinked them back. Behind us, a twig snapped. I turned so fast I nearly fell, but it wasn't a threat this time. The Comanche stood a few paces away. No bow now, just a small pouch in his hand. He approached, slowly, and crouched beside Jesse. I tensed, my fingers curling into fists. He opened the pouch and poured something into his palm, dried leaves and crushed bark. He gestured toward Jesse's forehead, then looked at me. I hesitated, heart pounding, but Jesse whimpered, and I saw the red flush climbing his cheeks. Fever. I gave a slight nod. The man worked without words. He mixed the herbs with water and laid the paste gently across Jesse's brow. His fingers were rough but careful. His eyes never left the boy's face. When he finished, he stood and stepped back. He didn't wait for thanks, didn't ask questions. He turned toward the woods again, but stopped just long enough to glance at me once more. Not a threat, not a devil, a man. As the sun slipped behind the trees, casting long shadows over the creek, I sat beside my son and held his hand. The paste on his forehead had a sharp, clean scent, like pine and earth after rain. I didn't know who the hunter was or why he'd helped us, but I knew this. We weren't alone anymore, and sometimes that was the first mercy. The valley he led us to wasn't marked on any map I'd ever seen. It dipped low beneath the highlands, cradled by cottonwoods and shielded by tall stone ridges that cut the wind. A place the sky seemed to forget, quiet, hidden, and impossibly still. He never spoke. Not a word, from the moment he appeared at dusk with a handful of herbs, too. Now, 4 days later, when we sat beside his fire and shared a thin broth of roots and rabbit. Jesse ate without question, too young to question kindness, too hungry to ask for names. But I watched him, the hunter, watched how he moved with purpose, never wasting a step, how he cleaned the knife he'd used to skin the rabbit every stroke, precise, respectful. He placed small stones in the fire before dawn and used them to warm Jesse's bedding when the mornings turned cruel. He slept with his back to the trees, eyes half shut, always listening. He never looked startled, never looked afraid, and never looked away from Jesse for long. Each day, I told myself we'd only stay one more night, that once Jesse was strong enough to walk without stumbling, we'd leave. But the truth sat heavy in my chest. I didn't know where to go. Not one town east of the river would take us in, not without a man's name or coin in hand, not with the stink of scandal still clinging to me like smoke. So I sat near the fire and stitched Jesse's sleeve where the hem had split, and tried not to let the silence press too hard against my bones. Once, I caught myself humming. A tune my mother used to sing when she folded laundry on sunlit porches. I stopped halfway through the first verse, but Jesse smiled in his sleep. The hunter, Tahoe, I'd started calling him in my thoughts because I couldn't bear not to name him, looked up from sharpening his blade. He didn't speak, but something softened behind his eyes. Just for a moment. Then it was gone, like a ripple vanishing on still water. He left every morning before sunrise, always returned before dusk. Sometimes with a rabbit or a brace of quail, sometimes with nothing at all but pine cones or berries or roots I didn't know the names of. Once he returned with a woven bundle of river reeds, shaped into something like a snare. He handed it to Jesse without ceremony. My boy took it in, both hands wide-eyed, and whispered, "Thank you." Tahoe said nothing, but he nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and returned to the trees. There were no words between us, not a single one, but there was understanding. One night, after Jesse had drifted off, I sat across from Tahoe at the fire. I hadn't spoken in hours, not since gathering kindling and boiling water for tea I'd made from leaves he'd shown me. "I was 18 when I met Jacob," I said, my voice low. The flames crackled, but he didn't move. "He worked leather, had strong hands and a kind face. His folks didn't like me. Said I talked too much and laughed too loud, but Jacob said he liked the way my eyes caught sunlight." I stared into the flames. They blamed me when the fever came. Said I didn't pray hard enough. Said I brought death with me. He died in his sleep, and I stayed awake every night afterward, waiting to join him. Tahoe didn't flinch. He didn't avert his eyes. Then Jesse cried, I whispered. He was just a baby, hungry and alone. I couldn't go, not yet. I didn't know why I was telling him. Maybe because he wouldn't speak back. Maybe because I trusted him not to twist my words or judge the weakness in them. When I looked up, he was still watching me, his expression unreadable. But the firelight flickered against his face, and I saw scars, deep ones, across his shoulder, down his ribs. Not just the kind left by blade or arrow, but by betrayal. The kind that makes a man forget how to trust. He stood and walked to the far side of camp. Came back a moment later with something cradled in his hands. A small bundle of carved wood and feathers. He knelt beside Jesse and tucked it into the boy's arms. A doll, roughly made, but shaped with care. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. Tahoe sat back, hands resting on his knees, and stared into the fire. I didn't know how to thank him. I only knew that no one, no soul, had done something that gentle for us in years. The next morning, I woke to Jesse laughing. Real laughter, not a nervous giggle or tired chuckle, but the kind that bubbles up straight from the chest. Tahoe was crouched in the shallows of the creek, his hands cupped. Lifting a silver fish from the water, Jesse clapped his hands and squealed as the fish thrashed and slipped back into the stream. Tahoe looked over his shoulder and smiled. It was faint, crooked, a rare thing, like sunlight through winter branches. But it was there, and for the first time since we were turned out of that house, I felt something stir in my chest that wasn't fear. It was faint, crooked, but it was there. Hope. He didn't speak, not once in those first days, but his presence filled the woods like a song without words. Jesse's fever broke on the second night. I woke to find him curled beside me, breathing steady, a faint flush of color back in his eye. Cheeks. Relief swept through me so strong I almost wept. I looked toward the trees, half expecting the hunter to be gone, vanished like smoke. But when I stirred the coals to life, he appeared without sound, carrying a handful of fish wrapped in wet leaves. He moved with purpose, no wasted motion, no hesitation. He set the fish down, gutted and cleaned them with a bone-handled knife, and skewered them over the fire, still wordless. Just nods, glances, gestures carved in the quiet. Jesse watched everything. I saw the way his eyes followed the man's hands, curious and unafraid. Children don't carry the same burdens we do. They haven't been fed the same fear. What's his name? Jesse whispered. I shook my head. He hasn't said. That night the hunter brought us to his camp. It wasn't much, just a lean-to, fashioned from branches and a worn buffalo hide. But it felt solid, purposeful, like someone had built it with care. He handed me a fur to wrap Jesse in and motioned to the stones beside the fire. There was a rhythm to the days that followed. The hunter rose with the sun and vanished into the woods, returning with food, herbs, or dry bark. I learned to gather berries that wouldn't kill us and brew tea from the narrow-leafed plants near the stream. I even managed to mend Jesse's socks with bits of sinew. My hands remembered how to be useful, but I never stopped watching him. One morning, as he crouched near the creek washing his hands, I saw the scars. Pale lines crossed his back, some long and deep, others short and jagged. They told a story I wasn't brave enough to ask about. Whips, blades, fire, whatever had carved them had left more than marks. It had left silence. I wondered what name he had before it was taken. If he had a family. If he'd buried them like I had. That night, after Jesse had fallen asleep, I sat by the fire with the hunter. The moon carved silver light through the trees. For a long time, we just listened to the crackle of flame and the creek's whisper. My husband's name was Jacob, I said. My voice felt foreign in the stillness. He died last winter. Fever. I stayed with his kin after, but they never looked at me right. Never looked at Jesse like he was theirs. The hunter didn't move, didn't turn. I lost a baby before Jesse, I added. Girl, just days old. I named her Ruth. Silence again, but not cold. More like the pause between notes in a song. I don't know why I'm telling you, I said, and half laughed. You probably don't even understand me. Then he stood, walked to the edge of the firelight. For a moment I thought he was leaving again. Instead, he knelt and dug something from his pack. When he returned, he laid it gently beside me. Doll, small, carved from soft wood, wrapped in a strip of faded blue cloth. Her eyes were scratched into the surface, her face smooth, her hands folded. No grand details, just simple, careful work. I picked it up, breath-catching. For her? I asked, voice barely a whisper. He nodded once. I couldn't speak, couldn't thank him, not the way it deserved. In that moment, I understood something. He didn't need words to say what mattered. His silence wasn't emptiness, it was reverence. I slept holding the doll close. A few days later, I was down at the stream rinsing clothes while Jesse napped in the shade. The woods were quiet, and I let myself believe just for a heartbeat that peace might be possible. Then hooves. 2 riders, dust trailing behind them, men in long coats and scuffed boots. One had a shotgun slung across his back, the other, a eyes grin full of teeth. They saw me before I could move. The one with the grin tipped his hat. Well now, what have we here? He drawled. I stood, heart hammering, water dripping from the cloth in my hands. Just passing through, I said carefully. Funny, the other said, dismounting. We ain't seen a woman like you in miles. You lost, miss? I didn't answer. That's when Jesse stepped from behind the tree. Still sleepy-eyed, barefoot, his small voice calling, Mama! The riders looked at him, then at me, and something ugly lit in their eyes. Ain't that sweet, the grinning one said. Family reunion. The other one stepped forward. Where's your man? Before I could answer, a shadow moved between the trees. The hunter stepped into view, bow in hand, not drawn, not raised, just resting against his leg. The men turned. One reached slowly for his holster. The hunter didn't blink. Something about the way he stood, calm, grounded, like the earth itself would rise if he asked it, made both riders pause. We don't want no trouble, the talker said. Sakura. Hunter said nothing. The silence stretched. Then the man spat in the dirt. Let's go. They rode off muttering, their bravado broken. I watched until the dust settled. The hunter turned back toward the trees. You didn't even threaten them, I murmured. He glanced back, and for the first time, I saw the ghost of a smile touch his lips. Not pride, not mockery, just a quiet knowing. A kind of peace I hadn't known men could carry. When Jesse crawled back into my lap that night and fell asleep listening to the wind, I looked across the fire and whispered, "Thank you." The hunter didn't answer, but I didn't need him to. The seasons began to change. Mornings grew colder, the air sharper. Leaves turned to fire above us, gold and rust and blood red, falling like blessings. We had been in the woods for nearly 2 moons by then, long enough for the silence between the 3 of us to become a kind of language. Jesse called him Stone. It wasn't his name, at least not one the hunter gave himself, but it fit. Solid, quiet, always there when the world shook. We never asked him to stay, and he never said he would. He simply didn't leave. He taught Jesse to make traps from twine and branches, showed me how to identify tracks, elk, fox, bobcat, and which mushrooms would kill a man in hours. I stitched a blanket from scraps of hide he brought back one evening. My hands, once brittle and unused, grew nimble again. Sometimes at dusk, Stone would sit on the edge of the firelight, carving something small and silent. Jesse would fall asleep at my side, his head on my thigh, and I would watch Stone's hands work, shaping, whittling, breathing life into wood. But the peace couldn't hold forever. That morning, the smell of smoke hit before the sound. Thick and bitter, carried on a gust from the west. Stone stood first, his shoulders tensed, his eyes narrowing toward the ridge. We climbed it together, Stone, Jesse, and I. From the top, we saw the trail of black climbing skyward like a warning. At the base of the valley, a wagon train burned. Charred wheels. Scattered goods. Something ugly and recent had passed through. Stone crouched low and studied the ground. I knelt beside him. "Raid?" I asked. He didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. A single figure moved through the smoke, stumbling, dragging a bloodied leg. I made to run, but Stone stopped me with one hand. He moved ahead, swift and silent, disappearing into the haze. He returned minutes later, carrying the girl. She couldn't have been more than 16. Her face was scratched, her dress torn, and her voice was gone from screaming. Jesse helped me fetch water, and I cleaned her wounds while Stone kept watch on the horizon. When she could speak, she said only one thing: "They're still out there." We stayed hidden that night, deep in the thicket. Stone laid down a line of ash and pine needles, a silent signal I didn't understand, but trusted. I kept the girl close, listening for hoofbeats, for rustling brush, for men with fire in their eyes. They came at dawn, 3 of them, greedy, loud, laughing like they owned the world. Stone was gone before the first footstep. The girl trembled beside me. Jesse pressed his face to my ribs. I held them both and waited. It didn't take bonk. A scream cut the air, sharp and sudden, then nothing. When Stone returned, his eyes were darker than I'd ever seen. Not with rage. No, something colder. The way a tree hardens in winter. The way a river goes still before it freezes. He didn't speak, just sat down and washed the blood from his hands. The girl left 2 days later, her leg wrapped in cloth, food packed in a sack Stone had made for her. She hugged Jesse, held my hand for a long moment, looked at Stone with wide, reverent eyes. He nodded once. Then she disappeared down the same ridge we'd come from months ago. Fall deepened. The trees grew bare. We moved our camp closer to a rocky outcrop where the wind couldn't bite so hard. I made a small pouch for the wooden doll and sewed it into my coat. Jesse asked one night, as we lay beneath the stars, "Will we stay here forever?" And I almost said yes, but I knew better. One morning, Stone brought us to a rise overlooking a distant town, just a clutch of rooftops and smoke trails on the horizon. He stood there a long while, arms crossed, unmoving. "There's a doctor." "There," I said softly. "And a schoolhouse. Maybe work." He didn't reply. I placed a hand on his arm. He looked down at me, and in that moment, I saw something shift in his eyes. Like a weight he'd been carrying too long had finally begun to lift. We left 2 days later. Stone walked with us to the edge of the tree line, where the plains opened wide and the first fences appeared like ribs in the earth. Jesse held his hand all the way there. He didn't say goodbye, just handed Jesse a small pouch and nodded at me. Inside was a carved bird. Simple, beautiful, its wings curved mid-flight. A gift. A promise. I tried to speak, to ask him to come with us, but he was already walking back toward the trees. Jesse waved until the forest swallowed him. We reached the town by nightfall. I found work at a laundry house and a room above the grocer's shop. Jesse started school, wide-eyed and eager, still clutching the bird in his coat pocket. Every evening, as the sky turned red over the rooftops, I would look toward the trees and wonder. Sometimes I swore I saw a figure at the edge, still watchful, like a sentinel made of bark and shadow. He never reappeared, not in the town, not on the roads, but his presence never left us. Because some men don't come into your life to stay. They come to turn the tide, quiet and fierce, when the world has given up on you. They come like stone, and they leave behind something stronger than words.